Wasps. This is a group of animals that I think most people have strong opinions about one way or the other. But wasps are actually a very diverse group of insects that involve many different species of many different habits. And so that's what we want to get into a little bit here and in a second part of this series here on wasps. Now, to begin with, wasps usually come up in the context of being one of the more important of the insects that sting. And here in Colorado, the kinds of things that can sting, meaning something on the hind end provides a defensive sting, would be some bees, some wasps, the scorpions, and some of the ants. Not most of the ants, but some of the ants can sting. The others bite. Um, the In terms of insects that are important for stinging here in this part of the world, by far the wasps are among their number. But bees are also important, and one of the first things I want to get straight is what is a bee and what is a wasp, because there's often a bit of confusion on these two groups of insects, and they are quite different, as we'll see as we go through this. So what is a bee is a much more simple question than what is a wasp. There are five families of insects that are considered bees, or five common families that are considered bees. And this would include common honeybees, as well as leafcutter bees, and sweat bees, and digger bees. But what's a bee is pretty well established. And bees are going to be insects that develop by feeding their young plant material. Nectar is the source that they use for energy, but pollen is what they use for providing them nutrients, that the other nutrients, the proteins, the fats, the vitamins, and the like. And of course, many bees have evolved with certain flowers. So, for instance, a bumblebee is one that is found in certain kinds of flowers, and many flowers have evolved to have bumblebees pollinate them, because bumblebees shake the flowers and get pollen out that the honeybees say would not do. Wasps, at least the social wasps, and again, wasp we'll see is a complicated term, but the social wasps, the ones that cause the stings of humans, and as well as the hunting wasps, a minor group of stinging insects, they feed on animal matter. They're not rearing their young on nectar and pollen. You might see some of these at a flower to sip some nectar for the adults to survive, but their young are fed either living insects that they collect, or living insects that they chew up, or carrion or other animal matter. Now, before we get off with the bees, I want to make the point that there's a lot of insects here in Colorado of either type, either bees or wasps. The bees have been particularly well studied. University of Colorado's had a long time association with understanding what the bees are in this part of the world, and there is a publication, The Bees of Colorado, that you might want to look if you want to see the checklist that they have. So, how many species of bees are known to occur in Colorado? And almost all of them are native. Well, it's 946, last I heard, and again, very few of them are not native to this part of the world. The honeybee is not native. That insect was brought here to Colorado, sometime in the mid 1800s. But almost any other bees that we have in the state evolved in this part of the world on plants that grow in this part of the world. Now, the term wasp gets pretty mushy. It's given to many kinds of insects across several families and of different habit, but they would include the social wasps, which I'm going to return to primarily in the second part of this series here. And these are the ones that make colonies. They feed on either live or dead animal material, and by far, these are the primary insects that sting people in this part of the world. The hunting wasps are a group that are far less recognized and observed by people, but they're also very common. And these are going to be ones that hunt insect prey, capture it, paralyze it, capture it, paralyze it, and then haul it back to some nest where they've previously constructed, and then they provision it with the paralyzed prey, and their young feeds on paralyzed prey. So we'll talk about those in just a little bit. Parasitoid wasps are a group that includes dozens of families, and they have a very different habit they insert their eggs into some kind of insect, and then the young of these wasps develop within the insect that they've parasitized. Some of these are very tiny, and some of them are a modest size, but they develop as internal parasites with few exceptions of some kind of insects. Extremely important group in biological control of many pests, and none of them sting humans. And it's a group we're not going to spend much time in this discussion. That would be better handled if we're just talking about biological controls of insects. Then there's some plant-feeding insects that we call wasps. There is a family of wasps that develop within plants called the wood wasps, also called the horntails, and they develop as borers in declining trees. So the term wasp, is given to this very different group of insects that don't sting at all, and develop as a wood borer. And then finally, another group of very common, at least species rich, group would be the gall wasps. And these are one very important group of insects that cause strange growths to appear on plants. In fact, they are the premier group of insects that produce very bizarre growths or galls on plants. Again, non-stinging. They just induce plants to grow in a very strange way. And this, again, is a group I'm not going to talk about now. That would be a different discussion on gall makers. Now, I think some of what we've just talked about it can be reintroduced if we discuss the wasp issue that defined last year, 2020. So I'm making it the 2021 bug of the year this year, because that is the insect that that caused the most attention and raised the most questions during the previous year. Now, I'm sure you're well aware at some degree about this whole issue, but basically, what started this is that in early May, there was a report, originally in the New York Times, that discussed a new species of wasp that had found its way into North America and had been discovered in a very small area right along the Washington State, British Columbia border. Now, this happens to be a very large wasp, and it is often called the giant or Asian giant hornet. However, some of the early headlines, unfortunately, put murder hornet or murder wasp in the title, and then this, of course, got picked up. And last year, people didn't have anything better to do than obsess on the news, since we couldn't do much. And of course, we saw all sorts of derivations on the internet that showed them to be of enormous size, which this picture would be typical on the lower right, which is, of course, far larger than what it actually is. It's just a photoshopped image. But this Asian giant hornet is a large hornet. And hornets are a group of insects that are in the genus Vespa, and it was recently discovered in a small area along that Washington-Columbia border. It is very closely related and not a whole heck of a lot bigger than the European hornet, which has been in the United States since the mid-1800s and was originally introduced through New York City area. But eastern United States has had a big hornet that came from Europe. Western North America got a introduction starting of a related species that's native to Asia. It is a social wasp, so the hornets are wasps that produce a colony. So this is going to produce a colony, and the colonies last one season, as we'll talk about. They make a brand new colony every year and survive between seasons as queens that were produced late in the season. Survive through the winter, start a new colony from scratch every year. It is a species where it does occur that is found only in abundance in low elevation moist forests. That's the habitat for the Asian giant hornet. And it feeds as a predator of many kinds of large insects. So it goes after beetles or katydids, maybe grasshoppers if it was around here. Social wasp, like a European paper wasp, would be a great prey for it, I would bet. And social bees. Now, despite having a very broad range of habits, almost all the attention was focused on the fact that they will sometimes raid honeybee colonies. And they do in the areas where it occurs. It's managed. It's a manageable problem where it occurs, but that caused a lot of extra anxiety about this whole issue. Now, during the last summer in 2020, all sorts of images and samples were submitted throughout the year by Coloradans who were sure they had murder hornets that they've seen in their yard or somewhere else. And several things were particularly commonly turned in, none of which, of course, were the giant Asian hornet. The group that probably comprised about half, if not more, of all the samples of what people thought were giant Asian hornets were some kind of horntail. These wood wasps. These are a family of wood-boring insects that are fairly unusual in appearance and often not observed. Many people normally don't see them. They limit their feeding to dying trees or recently killed trees. They're not a borer that will kill a tree, but they come in at the end stage. We have 10 species in the state. All of them, with one exception, develop in conifers, so these are mostly a forest group of insects. And one of the ones that were first turned in was what's called the giant wood wasp, Roseris gigas. And this was turned in surprisingly large numbers, I thought. Several dozen images and samples of this fairly obscure insect were sent in June 2020 with people concerned it was the giant Asian hornet. And it wasn't. It was a kind of horntail that people happened to notice last year. People noticed a lot of things last year that they, in a normal time, would not notice because they spend a lot of time in their yards. Now, there is a far more common or commonly observed kind of horntail or wood wasp that occurs in Colorado as well as much of the United States, called the pigeon Tremex. Tremex columba, and this is the one that goes into deciduous trees such as maples, elms, and ash, and is found in urbanized areas, fairly commonly associated with dying or recently dead trees. Here's one that is laying its eggs underneath the bark. Now, these insects have kind of a spine sticking off the hind end, and they're quite big in size, but what that spine on the hind end houses the ovipositor, the structure that's being used here to lay eggs. These cannot sting. They have a stinger, if you will, but its function is to lay eggs. It hasn't been repurposed for defense. And it's not a small insect. I mean, this is a fairly large pigeon Tremex and a moderate-sized giant Asian hornet, but I mean, they're about the same size, and they're both pretty unusual looking. Of course, the pigeon Tremex is quite elongate-bodied and considerably thinner, as is typical of horntails. Again, on the hind end of the pigeon Tremex and all the female horntails, you will see this spike that houses the ovipositor for laying eggs. Now, there is another wasp that's associated with the pigeon Tremex, and together, these two insects, I think, make a really interesting story. They're two of the most unusual insects people might see in a yard and garden in parts of Colorado, where there's a dead and dying tree. And I did make a little videotape on this with the link that you can see here. And one of them is the pigeon Tremex, which is the wood-boring wasp that you might see visiting trees in midsummer, laying its eggs underneath the bark. And the second is a wasp that is a parasitoid, one that develops internally on another insect. The one on the right, the giant ichneumon wasp, is a extremely large parasitoid wasp, and females of this can identify where there is a developing stage of a horntail underneath the bark, and then she can set up and drill to it, maybe an inch or more to lay an egg onto the developing pigeon tree mech spore when it's a borer underneath the bark and kill it. Anyway, fascinating insects. And again, this is developed more in a little video I did just on these two that's runs about 7 minutes. Now, the other kinds of insects that were turned in that surprised me quite a bit, how often they were turned in, were insects known as cicada killers. And cicada killers are a kind of insect that is a hunting wasp, meaning they hunt a certain kind of insect, catch it, paralyze it, and then haul it back to their nest to provide food for their young. And the kind of insect that they specialize in are large cicadas, the dog-day cicadas, the ones that perhaps you have heard in midsummer, the dog days of summer, droning high in the trees, at dusk in particular. A group of insects that you're going to find mostly in southeast Colorado, but increasingly they have been moving up the urban corridor, and now we even see them in Fort Collins. I don't think 20 years ago they were in Fort Collins, but we have a few cicadas now. You don't have them in western Colorado. The dog-day cicadas don't occur over there. But what attracted attention were these wasps that attack them. So cicada killers are quite large wasps. The prey that they go after is in the upper left. That would be a dog-day cicada, the most common one we have in eastern Colorado. Here we see a cicada killer, eastern cicada killer, that is with its cicada prey, as is in the lower left picture. They will capture these, and then in a hole that they have previously dug, perhaps 16 inches down into the ground, that has a little side chamber, they will then take the paralyzed cicada and stuff it in there. If they're going to lay a female egg, they get a second one. It takes 2 cicadas to raise a female of this, 1 cicada to raise a male. And most wasps and bees can control the sex of their young. Eastern cicada killer is no slouch. I mean, in this picture, this is a pretty big eastern cicada killer, and again, a modest-sized or moderately sized giant Asian hornet, but they're about the same size. And the eastern cicada killer is something we've always had here in Colorado. So, on this whole issue, some things to keep in mind. The giant Asian hornet is an insect that is presently found only in a tiny area of North America. It is an insect that is adapted to moist, low elevation forest. That doesn't read Colorado. It does read where it's being found now in parts of California and in Washington and British Columbia. The insect does not hitchhike well. This is not an insect that is easily going to be carried in a car. You would have to bring females that were fertilized, a queen, and they just don't get into cars. They're out in the forest. So, on its own, there is almost no chance it would ever get to Colorado. There's way too many barriers, ecological barriers, where it would not survive. And were somebody to bring some here to purposely attempt to establish in Colorado, I think this insect would find life in Colorado to be hell. It wouldn't thrive. It's just not the right kind of environment. It's not a moist forest. The kind of prey it goes after is not there. The sites where it likes to make nests would not be available. Anyway, we've got a lot of things to worry about these days, but just don't take this off your list of things to worry about for the giant Asian hornet. And if you want to get a little more information on this, avoid most of the internet. Go to a good source, and there's good sources. Washington State is dealing with this a lot. The Washington Department of Agriculture, they have a wonderful website on hornets and reporting it. And also, looking at this the other day, there are some wonderful videos that have been produced that will show you what this looks like and tell you what they're doing about it. And at this point, I think it's very likely we may be able to eradicate it. There's very few that have been found, and they're looking hard, and this may be a non-issue in a couple of years. But there are a couple of great videos if you go to the Washington Department of Agriculture website, and this is one of the better ones. It's about 25 minutes, but it's got excellent images and really explains what they've been doing. Now, Moving on to the wasp, the other group of wasps that I would like to talk about in this section uh, is the group we call hunting wasps. Hunting wasps are a group of wasps that are very species rich. I mean, there are scores, maybe hundreds of species of hunting wasps, but these are far, far less recognized than are the social wasps that sting, like a yellow jacket or a paper wasp or a bald-faced hornet. There are three families of wasps that we call hunting wasps: Sphecidae, Crabronidae, and Pompilidae, excuse me. And the hunting wasps, what their habits are is they're going to be a solitary wasp. They do not make a colony. Solitary wasp means the mother does all the work. She finds or creates a nest. She then collects prey to feed her young, and then maintains the nest and builds it up. The young of all hunting wasps are fed some kind of paralyzed prey, and each kind of hunting wasp specializes in a certain kind of insect. Some may go after hairy caterpillars, a woolly bear. Others may go after naked caterpillars. Others may go after beetles. Others may go after aphids. Others may go after stink bugs. The nests that they produce to rear their young may be ones they dig in the soil or excavate out of a plant stem. Some, the mud daubers, construct their nest out of mud, and some will use existing cavities and then seal it up after they've provisioned it with prey. These kind of wasps can sting. They have a stinger. However, the stinger is rarely employed for defense unless you are grabbing it. These are not insects that defend a nest and have expendable workers. I mean, it's the mother. She works away, and if you grab her, she will sting you. And that being said, the sting of these hunting wasps often is very mild. The majority of the hunting wasp have a sting that is maybe a pinprick or so, maybe not very, very mild and not persisting kind of discomfort. There is one group, these ones, the Pompilidae, the ones we call spider wasps, they can produce a painful sting. But again, if you want to experience that, you're going to have to grab them. I wouldn't recommend that, but some people do that. Anyway, a hunting wasp is has got different habits and different nest sites. And the first one I ever saw in Colorado and got pictures of, we were camping at Rifle Falls Campground State Park, and saw this very skinny looking wasp that was, when I first saw it in the upper left, was actually filling in a hole. It was filling in the nest hole because then it left to hunt. And 15, 20 minutes or so later, happened to observe that wasp returning, only now it had some prey. It had captured a large naked caterpillar, which is the kind of insect that this wasp specializes in, a cherry sphinx moth that develops in chokecherry. Carrying it back, comes back to the entrance, unseals the entrance. They block the entrance when they're out because they don't want parasites to get in, and then dragged that paralyzed caterpillar down into the ground, where I assume there was some little side chamber that it stuffed it into, laid an egg on it, and then sealed it up and left to do it again. Make a new chamber, hunt a new caterpillar, lay a new egg, repeat the cycle. And then the young would then consume this paralyzed caterpillar. A group called the sand wasps dig in sandy sites, and they go after flies, various kinds of flies. So here's a sand wasp re-excavating a hole that it had filled in when it was hunting, and underneath it is carrying a paralyzed horsefly. A big wasp, one of the biggest of the hunting wasps we have in this state, are the golden digger wasp, the great golden digger, and these will go after a grasshopper or a katydid, and so you might see them dragging a paralyzed grasshopper or katydid and then shoving it down into the hole that it's previously made in the soil. This would be a soil nesting species. A similar one that's also fairly big, but is kind of a shiny black. Blue-black is the steel blue cricket hunter, and it captures the kinds of field crickets, the dark field crickets that live on the ground. The largest of all is the cicada killers, and these are again very impressive insects to me. They kind of remind me of a giant mutant yellow jacket from hell, but very impressive insects. And these this year were found in Denver, surprisingly common. I've always thought of them as something we find in the eastern plains, particularly the southeastern part of the state. But they were turned in several times last summer in from the Denver metro area. Now, each one goes after different prey. One that had an interesting experience viewing a few times is one that nests in the sand as well. They like particularly sand sites that are sandy of a particular texture, and then they hunt stink bugs and leaf-footed bugs, stinky bugs. This is one that has periodically come up over the years because it nests in playgrounds and sandboxes, and was able to get a series of video on this with Darren Davidson's help a couple of years ago. So here's a playground in Longmont where there was quite a bit of concern because all of these were out and about. So here's the playground, and you'll notice wasps zipping around pretty soon in this. All the ones zipping around, with few exceptions, are males looking for females. Males, by the way, do not sting. No wasp, no bee, males sting. Only females sting. Anyway, there's a female. She has this nest site. She nests in the ground, re-excavating this out. And then after she's got some kind of nest cell that's ready, she then packs it back up and then goes and hunts. There's a male coming to hassle her. Now here's the female with some prey now. She's caught something, and she tries to find that nest entrance, and she's going to open it up. And when it's fully opened up, she will then take that prey down into the nest and stuff it in a little cell, and then go out and hunt another one. And usually it takes about 6, 7, 8 prey in one cell to provide enough food for one of her young. So during that day, we pulled a couple nest cells, went and dug out what they had, and what they were hunting is some kind of stink bug. So there's two kinds of stink bugs, nymphs, immature stink bugs on the upper line, or in the middle are a stink bug called the rough stink bugs, again nymphs, immature stages that they were picking up, and this was early July. And on the bottom are nymphs of the western conifer seed bug, an insect that sometimes comes into houses in the adult stage in fall. But all of these are feeding on plants. They're harmless to humans, but that's what this kind of wasp goes after for prey, certain kinds of stinky bugs. Some other ones you might see. There's a group of wasps that specialize in tree crickets. These are the crickets that live in a tree or a shrub, which, by the way, are the ones, if you've ever heard, you can tell the temperature by counting the chirp rate. It's tree crickets that you can do that with. So these ones use grass to line a cavity that they have found. They use existing cavities, get grass to line it. So in this picture right here, you can see a tube that was put out and grass between the cells. And here's a group of a mass of grass that was extracted that was a nest cell. And then they provision it with prey. And these would be the prey that they go after, the tree crickets. A common site where grass-carrying wasps might nest in a yard might be the track of a window. It could be just the right cavity, and you might see some grass sticking out at one edge, and look at it. What the heck is that? It's a grass-carrying hunting wasp using your window as a nest site. Another one that comes in about this time of year every year, a couple calls on this, and I'm doing this in early March, is a hunting wasp that goes after leafhoppers and nests in the soil, but where people notice it is when they come out in houses. They see this tiny little wasp, Sino punctatus, coming out in a home. And the question is, where are these coming from? Sometimes there's a half dozen or more. This is an insect that Again, nests in the soil. They like to use little soil cracks, and then they'll excavate it out a little more and provision the nest with leafhopper prey, seal it up. And then the next year, May, June, they'll come out as an adult. However, why they come out indoors every time that I've heard of this is that somebody brought in houseplants that had been outdoors the previous year. And when you have a houseplant in a pot, it dries and it gets uh, a little opening along the edge where the pot is, and that's a nice little nest site for these wasps. And so that's where they start the nest. That's where they provision it with leafhoppers, and that's where their young rear. And normally they'd come out in May, but you bring in your plants in the wintertime, and they come out in February, or maybe even January. Now, the one group that makes a nest, that constructs wholly a nest, are the mud daubers, and they will make a nest out of mud. So you will see the mother collecting mud. She gets a glob of mud, and she will form it in the lower left here. She'll form it into a cell, an elongate cell. The one we have around here, the black and yellow mud dauber, makes an elongate cell. Might take 30 trips to a mud patch to make one cell. And after that's made, she then goes out and hunts. And mud daubers hunt spiders. They are a true hunting wasp, but they like spiders of different kinds. And here's a nice series of pictures from the Ken Gray collection. So up here in the upper right, so this is a nest cell that is packed with paralyzed spiders. This picture was taken just after that cell had been fully provisioned, and now it's opened up, and you can see there's one spider in the next cell, and that's the one that the female was working on when this photo was taken. Uh, the young, after they hatch from the egg, will rapidly consume their prey. So here is a wasp larva consuming one of these, in this case, crab spiders. Usually within a week, certainly 10 days, the developing larva will consume them all, and there'll be very little left. And then they make a little kind of cellophane cocoon around their body, and they stay within that and go into a dormant state, pupating the next year and emerging the next year usually. So this is in the upper left is a picture of multiple cells. These will make multiple cells together, so it kind of looks like a big clod of mud. Um, and if you pull it off the surface, they're usually attached to a wall or a soffit or something like that where it's protected. You can see the the developing young that were in their little cellophane envelopes where they will pass through the winter. Now, there is a new mud dauber we have here in the state called Sceliphron curvatum, or sometimes called the Asian mud dauber. And this is an insect that's only been known from this state, and for a long time we were the only state where it was known. Uh, since maybe 2006, I think, is the first record, maybe 2005. But presently we've got records from Boulder and Denver, El Paso, Fremont, Jefferson, Larimer, and even on the west slope in Mesa County. I think Garfield County as well. But multiple counties we've now seen it. It makes a mud nest, a mud cell for its young, but individual pots. So each one is a discrete pot. They don't put them all together in one big mud clod. So a little more elegant, and you can certainly see what they look like. And they like to nest in areas where there's existing cavity. And again, the track of a window well may be perfect for this. So you might see these little pots that they have made. So again, the nest cells they're going to make are going to be constructed of mud. We have a wonderful picture on the lower left. Of a wasp that has been collecting the mud, and then it gets formed into the cells that we see, and inside each of these are spiders that they collect. So this is the contents of a single cell that I opened up that was collected in Denver, and a lot of what they're going after, there's a certain kind of non-native jumping spider here, and here's the um, uh, the spiders that prowl around at night, the prowling spiders, and then some of the prowling crab spiders as well. So they go after active hunting spiders. It appears from here, and this would be a full-grown larva, and again that cellophane-like envelope they make after they're full-grown, and ultimately they'll pupate within that. By the way, this is an insect that I'm interested in, and in 2021 I'm looking for freshly made nest cells containing spider prey so that we can quantify just what kind of spiders this insect is feeding on. This is again an insect that is not well studied at all in the United States, and we are one of the few states where it occurs. So if by any chance you find some of these nest cells this summer and they are fresh, you can see that they're being made, and there's still spiders in them, I would like to get those if you wish, and we can talk about how to do all that. So my email is here in this bottom of this, and I've put it elsewhere. Now the last of the hunting wasps is the family Pompilidae that are the spider wasp. These only go after spiders, and they go after a single spider, a spider that is large enough to support one of them developing just on that spider. So the size of the spider wasp will match the size of the spider it hunts. These are usually black, shiny black. They may have orange wings. They're very twitchy. I mean, when you see them, they just their wings they're constantly flicking their wings, and they look for spiders. And if they catch them, they paralyze them. Here's a little video that a student from my class once turned in, where it's grabbing a spider, carrying it along the sidewalk here. And the angle's a little funny, but ultimately this one was taking it up into a little cavity in the side of a wall, and then it stuffed the spider in there, laid an egg on it, and then the young of the spider wasp then consumed that spider. The largest of all of these spider wasps are the ones that hunt the largest of all the spiders, the ones we call tarantula hawks, Pepsis and Hemipepsis. And we have tarantulas in parts of Colorado, and we also have some very large wolf spiders in Colorado that are the prey of these largest of all the spider wasps. So there are lots of kinds of wasps, and the ones that I've covered so far would be the solitary wasps, the hunting wasp in particular, but again there's others, the parasitoid wasps and the wood wasps and the gall wasp. The next topic in the second part of this are the ones that cause most of the stinging, and these will be the social wasps, the ones that cause most stinging, that produce a colony, and that's going to be part 2. So that's it for this. This is part 1 of 2. So I hope you found some of these topics of interest to you.